Guys, I recently watched this horror comedy series on Apple TV called Widow's Bay, created by Katie Dippold. The series has a total of 10 episodes, and in today's video, we are gonna go through all 10 episodes and dig into a bunch of theories along the way. Before we get into it, I just wanna ask, if you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button and make sure to subscribe to the channel. So with that said, let's roll the intro. So the first episode is called Welcome to Widow's Bay, and it kicks off with this dude named Shep Clark who's out on his boat late at night. Suddenly a ton of birds start circling around his boat, and then this thick creepy fog rolls in and completely surrounds him. Shep was connected over VHF radio to a guy named Lonnie on shore, and Lonnie can see this wild fog showing up on his systems too. Around the same time, an earthquake hits Widow's Bay, the island near the sea, and knocks out power to the entire island. We see Mayor Tom Loftis jumping up in a panic, and he realizes his son Evan had snuck out of his bed, meaning Evan had quietly slipped out to go hang with his friends. Now the next morning, Mayor Tom is super stressed because Widow's Bay has no power. But the other employees at his office are totally chill, like they couldn't care less whether the lights were on or not. Tom's real anxiety was because a journalist from the New York Times was coming to Widow's Bay that day to write an article about the place. If this journalist writes good stuff about Widow's Bay, tourists would flock in during vacation season, which would help the town grow. But thanks to last night's earthquake, there's literally no power today. And speaking of development, let me give you some context. This town is seriously behind the times. Like, only landlines work here because there's zero cell reception. There's not even Wi-Fi available on this island. Now, Tom's office has quite a cast of characters. His secretary is this older woman named Ruth. And then there's Patricia, Rosemary, and Dale also working there. Plus a bunch of others I'll introduce as the story moves along. We can see that Widow's Bay's power issue was slowly getting fixed as electricity started coming back on around town. Anyway, Tom has a conversation with the town sheriff, who tells him Shep Clark has been missing since last night. Tom thinks Shep probably just passed out somewhere after drinking, but the sheriff says no. Shep was out on the ocean last night, connected over VHF to Harbor Master Lonnie, and then he just vanished. Right in the middle of that conversation, Tom looks out the window and spots a boat that's already arrived at their shore. This means the New York Times journalist showed up earlier than expected, and he'd already gone over to the town's historical society, basically like a historical museum displaying the whole town's history. Tom rushes over, where he meets the journalist Arthur. A historical society employee named Gary is giving Arthur the rundown on the town's past, and honestly, these stories are wild. Like, the legend goes that a few hundred years back, 42 passengers set out from the mainland on a sea voyage to find a new place to settle. That's how they ended up at Widow's Bay and put down roots here. The leader of this group was a guy named Richard Warren, who also became the town's first mayor. Tom says there was nothing on the island initially, but Jerry hints that some teeth were found here, though Tom immediately tries to brush past that. This island had witch trials in its past, and then back in 1786, when the townspeople were locked inside a church to shelter from a storm, they started consuming each other. Tom really did not want Arthur hearing any of Widow's Bay's horrifying history, but the historical society had it all boldly on display. Regardless, Tom gives Arthur a map of the town, with specific spots marked where Arthur is allowed to roam. Tom tells Arthur he'll meet him at the Salty Whale restaurant at 7 p.m. the one and only decent restaurant in town. It's pretty obvious from these scenes that Tom desperately wants Arthur to write good things about this place so tourists come, the local economy gets a boost, and the town actually develops. But the townspeople couldn't care less about any of that. Like, Tom's office employees were casually discussing this old haunted hospital in town. Patricia claimed she encountered the boogeyman as a child. Then a guy named Wyke shows up at the mayor's office saying the fog took Shep, and that the same phenomenon is starting up again in town. What phenomenon? We're not told yet, but Wyke strongly insists they should shut down all activities in town and sound the alarm. Tom thinks this is all ridiculous, and there's no way he can do any of that with Arthur on the island right now. Wyke says Tom doesn't appreciate this town's history, and Tom pretends to get a call from the sheriff saying Shep has been found. But in reality, Shep was still missing, and Tom was just putting pressure on the sheriff to find him fast. After that, Tom meets his son Evan at home. the most mischievous kid on this island, and gives him a lecture. Through their conversation, we learn Tom married his wife after dating her for just 4 months, and she was already pregnant with Evan at the time. Evan then drops this really interesting line that this island feels like a prison to him, with nothing to do. And get this, Evan has literally never left the island. Right then, the island alarm starts going off, and Tom finds out Wick had triggered it. Tom gets Wick to somehow shut it down, but in exchange, Wick says Tom has to sit and listen to him for 5 minutes without interrupting. So yes, inside the restaurant, Tom and Patricia sit down with Wick, who drops a lot of info about Widow's Bay. He says something is seriously rotten on this island, and it always starts with an earthquake. The earthquake means she is waking up, and then fog rolls in and affects people. For example, back in 1846 when this happened, people called it the fog that stole souls. In stage 1, a person's eyes turn completely white. In stage 2, all 5 senses shut down and the person becomes a little delusional. Then in stage 3, the main thing stops working, if you know what I mean. After that, the person kind of shifts into a zombie state, and Wyke believes the sailor's revenant state starts visiting the living. He says that since 1873, the SS Mary and her entire crew, around 62 people, have been missing for over 62 years, and the mayor at the time had the lighthouse shut down so the ship would crash into the rocks. Apparently, the mayor wanted to pursue the captain's young bride, who was only 16 years old, while the mayor himself was over 50. In short, Wyke had a ton of bizarre stories about this island, and Tom basically tells him to stop chasing old legends and think about Widow's Bay's future. Hearing that, Wyke snaps and says he knows Tom. Tom is not a true leader, because even as a kid, Tom would front for his friends, claiming he rang Wyke's doorbell and ran, when in reality, Tom never even worked up the nerve to do it. These two clearly do not like each other. And then Shep Clark suddenly walks into the restaurant and collapses to the floor. Yep guys, Shep had finally shown up, so he's immediately rushed to the hospital. Shep was sedated and unconscious, and when Tom slips in alone to see him, it feels like Shep is trying to tell him something. Then suddenly, we see Shep's eyes go completely white and he snaps into this bizarre state and attacks Tom. Literally within seconds, Shep couldn't make it, which was seriously unsettling. Now here's another wild detail. When Tom read Shep's reports, his age was listed as only 37, but Shep clearly looked way older. And the report also said there was no alcohol in Shep's system, which means he didn't disappear because of drinking. Anyway, Shep not making it had Tom pretty shaken. Still, he shows up at the Salty Whale at 7 p.m. to meet Arthur. Arthur genuinely says he liked Widow's Bay and would write positively about it. But Arthur mentions that from talking to the locals, he learned that people born in Widow's Bay can never leave the island. Some had tried, but after making it to the mainland, they couldn't make it within days. Heart attacks and stuff. For example, Marsha Dogan went to the mainland and was gone the very next day. Tom pushes back, saying he goes to the mainland all the time. And Arthur was like, well, Tom lives here, but he wasn't born here. In fact, Tom's son was born on this island and Tom had never let him leave, though Tom tells Arthur his son has been to the mainland. From this scene, we can tell that Tom secretly believes in this island's weird superstitions. He just doesn't want to show it. Right then, the town's power cuts out and Tom notices the fog had crept up close to the restaurant. He tells everyone inside to stay put, and when 2 or 3 people try to leave, he physically blocks them. This causes a bit of a panic, because Tom was terrified people would vanish into the fog, but then the lights came back and the fog had disappeared too. Arthur thinks Tom was just putting on a spooky performance to give the town a mysterious vibe, but we viewers know Tom was genuinely terrified. After dinner, Tom gets startled by waitress Kathy, who suddenly appeared right behind him. The episode ends with a shot of a chair deep underground in the town, a deeply unsettling chair, the kind built to restrain people, exactly like that. Metal doors stood in front of it, and that's where the first episode ends. Now the second episode is called Lodging, and it kicks off with the sound of the town church bell ringing. Then early in the morning, we see Tom and Patricia in a car together, both in a really good mood. The car is stacked with tourism pamphlets for the town. We are told right away that Arthur published his article praising Widow's Bay, meaning a ton of tourists are expected during the upcoming vacation weeks. Because of this, Tom's been getting the townspeople to invest, like putting in a cappuccino machine at the coffee shop and pouring money into reopening an old inn. The inn had gotten fully booked already, but then Wyke just loses it and starts nailing the inn's doors shut, saying the hotel is haunted. This caused a whole scene, and with the sheriff's help, Tom has Wyke arrested. Tom even kind of calls Wyke a backward fool in front of everyone, which gets the townspeople riled up since they all deeply respected Wyke. After that, Tom heads to the restaurant where he runs into the town reverend. Tom apologizes because his son Evan may have rung the church bell that morning, which had disturbed everyone in town. The reverend is visibly stunned because in his mind the church bell literally cannot be rung. So how did Evan do it? Keep this detail in mind, guys, because it's going to connect to things later on. For now, the reverend leaves and the locals at the restaurant are clearly not vibing with Tom since he had talked badly about Wyke. To prove a point, Tom tells everyone he doesn't believe the inn is haunted, and to prove it, he'll spend the night there alone. If Tom can pull that off, the townspeople will get on board and help turn the place into a proper tourist spot. So everyone gives Tom a list of dares he has to complete while staying overnight. Like, Tom has to spend the night in the captain's suite because legend has it a captain lost his mind there and unalived his own family with an axe. Then Tom has to say Ugly Hortense 3 times because there's a local legend about a very unfortunate looking woman named Hortense Fitzgerald who fled her wedding and fell from the inn's window to her end. So saying Ugly Hortense 3 times supposedly makes her shadowy reflection appear. Then in 1962 on New Year's Eve, a severed head belonging to a guy named John Reynolds was found in the inn's dumbwaiter, so Tom has to go in there. And back in 1951 there was supposedly a clown-like unaliver staying there, so Tom has to spend time in the crawl space too. In short, guys, Tom gets a whole list of tasks to knock out before the townspeople will help him. So that night, Tom heads to the inn, which is lined with these wild portraits, like pictures of people vanishing into fog. The inn's owner, Kurt, gives Tom the key to the captain's suite but refuses to go up there himself. In fact, Kurt's not even staying the night, he's leaving Tom completely alone. The inn has an honor bar, meaning people help themselves to drinks and write down what they took to pay later. Though the owner had installed a camera in the bar to monitor things, to make sure nobody steals drinks, which kind of defeats the whole point of an honor bar. Anyway, Kurt gives Tom a key plus a camera to record himself completing the dares. Then Kurt takes off. On another side of things, the church reverend goes into a locked room in the church where we see the church bell, which is completely locked up, bound with chains and everything. So then how did it ring last night? The reverend pulls out what looks like a letter with specific instructions. We can't read exactly what they say, we just barely make out that if the bell rings on its own, these instructions must be followed. Parallel to this, we also pick up that the town's sheriff is about to move away. Back to Tom. He turns on the TV in the captain's suite where an old man says "Welcome to Widow's Bay" and then just keeps walking and disappears off screen. Tom closes the curtains because the lighthouse beam keeps bleeding in through the window. He wanders around the inn and finds board games. One called Daddy's Home, a box labeled Teeth with a pair of pliers inside, some run cards and more. Then Tom pours himself a drink and starts knocking out the dares one by one. He completes several but keeps skipping the crawl space because it's in the basement and who knows what's lurking down there. Tom heads back to the captain's suite where the curtain had somehow opened back up on its own. He closes it again, then hears a voice from the room's duct counting down from 10 to 1 and saying Happy New Year. Tom figures someone else must be in here and starts calling out in the corridor. Then a guy named William steps out from the next room, startling Tom. Turns out there was another guest staying at the inn that Kurt never mentioned. William seemed like a chill dude and just headed back to his room. Now when Tom watches TV, he spots a dark shadow. Then the Welcome to Widow's Bay guy shows up on screen again. Then a short circuit kills the TV and the lamp. Tom shouts and William comes to check on him. They head to the bar area and start talking. William says he works for a structural engineering firm and is currently in Widow's Bay to assess the dock for potential expansion. He says he's been here before and the locals just never want to change anything. Tom agrees, saying he wants to develop this place, but the townspeople keep getting in the way. We also learn nobody actually wanted to be mayor of this town, so Tom ran unopposed and won. After that, William and Tom have drinks and play the Daddy's Home board game. Tom shares that his dad was from this island but his mom was from the mainland. They met on a schooner tour and divorced pretty quickly. So Tom grew up mostly in Massachusetts and came here only during summers to stay with his dad, who he wasn't really close to. Tom moved to the island permanently when his dad got seriously ill and came back to care for him. He then met his wife here and has been settled here ever since. Tom mentions his dad used to get drunk and tell him all these wild, violent stories about this island. At this point, William gets dead serious and says, "Be careful, the backward people of this town will try to drag you down to their level." Then William starts going off, saying things like, "Let them rot in hell, watch them all burn," which was genuinely unnerving. And then out of nowhere, William was like, "I've had way too much to drink, I'm going to bed." So after William leaves, Tom finally goes down to tackle the crawl space there in the basement. As he crawls in, he gets the feeling something followed him inside. He asks if anyone's there, and that's when we see William's feet outside the crawl space. William creepily says he's coming in, and Tom tells him absolutely not. But suddenly William crawls in anyways, then transforms into a clown and starts crawling toward Tom on all fours in this terrifying way. Tom screams, and the next second he jolts awake in the captain's suite. Cut. The next morning, the sheriff and Kurt are at the inn, and Tom tells them what he experienced. They check the bar's CCTV and find Tom was alone all night, drinking by himself. There's no William. Kurt never let anyone by that name in, and the hotel was locked from outside. So either Tom just imagined William, or William was the ghost clown from 1951. Volk also shows up and starts telling his spooky stories. Kurt snaps at him since he poured serious money into reopening this inn. Volk dares Kurt to step into the captain's suite, and a terrified Kurt manages to hold on for 30 seconds. Now the sheriff discovers there's mold in the captain's suite, and guys, mold can actually trigger hallucinations, so maybe that explains what Tom was seeing. Overall, everything circles back to the same question: are there actually ghosts here, or is it all just the locals' imagination? And that's where episode 2 ends. So by the end of episode 2, we saw Mayor Tom spend a night in the island's inn with some seriously strange experiences. Now episode 3 is called The Inaugural Swim, and the story has jumped forward. Widow's Bay is now crawling with tourists. We are shown an old video of a previous mayor introducing the town, and then he does this bizarre thing where he just leans himself against a door and stands there. Anyway, Tom is absolutely thrilled that tourists have arrived. While driving around, he runs into a tourist named Marissa, who's a little lost because the street signs have been defaced with paint and rude messages, which honestly sounds like Tom's son's handiwork. Tom offers her a ride, and she hesitates at first but gets in once she finds out Tom's the mayor. We pick up that Marissa came to the island for her friend's bachelorette party, and they're all staying at the inn. Tom tells her there's an inaugural swim event in town tomorrow where he as mayor will swim in the ocean. It's the island's annual tradition. The mayor takes a dip to signal that the seawater is safe and there's nothing dangerous out there. Tom invites Marissa to the event, mentioning there'll be a sunset cocktails event right after. Marissa invites Tom to the Barnabas Tavern bar that very night, and it was pretty clear these two were into each other. Tom drops Marissa off, then heads back to his office to make sure everything for tomorrow's swim is going to be perfect. Partly because Marissa might show, that night Tom gets dressed and heads to the Barnabas Tavern, but after waiting forever, Marissa never shows. Bummed out, Tom is heading home when he spots an old woman standing in the road. Tom asks if she needs help, but suddenly this woman starts creeping toward his car in the most unsettling way. Tom throws the car into reverse and backs away fast, then stops a bit down the road. Then we see this old woman appear at his back window, and she reaches her arm through the side window and claws at Tom's hand. Tom panics and floors it out of there. The next day, Tom calls Sheriff Bashir about what happened, but Bashir doesn't take it seriously. Tom then heads to the town doctor to get his arm treated because that old woman did some serious damage to his hand. The doctor looks at the marks and says they look like animal scratches, and also warns Tom, don't go swimming with this open wound. Even so, Tom heads to his office, where his assistant Ruth tells him someone named Marissa had come looking for him. Hearing this, Tom gets a little excited and decides he's going through with the swim. Now, word of last night's incident had reached Tom's office staff, and Rosemary's take was that Tom had been attacked by a sea hag. According to Rosemary, the sea hag targets lone sailors and follows them home. She scratches them so a tiny bit of the sailor's skin gets under her nails, which is how she tracks them. The sea hag is a trickster who waits until the sailor is completely alone, and then, well, Rosemary couldn't finish the story because she started coughing, and Tom wasn't eager to hear the rest anyway. But one thing was crystal clear: if this legend is real, the sea hag can now track Tom Tom very easily. Anyway, Tom heads to the beach for the inaugural swim and welcomes the gathered tourists, though his speech can't broadcast over the mic because of power issues. After the speech, Tom dives in and swims toward the designated spot. From there, he was supposed to swim back to shore, but then Tom spots the sea hag in the water. Yep guys, she had followed him into the ocean. A terrified Tom starts swimming back to shore as fast as he can. At one point, it feels like the sea hag is about to drag him under, but Tom thrashes his way back to the beach somehow. Everyone watching Tom is shaken by how distressed he looks, and closer inspection shows clear cuts on his feet, meaning the sea hag was genuinely pulling him down. After this, Tom goes straight to Wick, because Wick knew a crazy amount about this island's legends. Wick starts singing while explaining how the hag works. Once she scratches you, she can follow you anywhere, land or sea. Eventually, she'll climb right on your face, and it's inside her grip that a person meets their end. The only way out is for Tom to lock himself inside a large chest for 72 hours. That way, the hag can't track him for those 72 hours, the wound she gave him heals, and after that she can never track him again. But Tom needs to act fast because the hag's scratches cause paralysis, and by tonight Tom won't even be able to move. Tom thinks Wyke's ideas are insane, but deep down he was low-key terrified. That evening, Tom's son Evan tells him someone named Marissa called the house and invited Tom to the Driftwood Diner. Tom rushes over and sure enough, Marissa is there. They start talking and sharing personal stuff, like Tom opens up about how his wife is no longer in this world. They start getting close, but then Tom says he has to head to his colleague's Sunset Cocktails event. Marissa didn't want him to leave. She even brings up coming back to his place, but Tom hurries out of the diner anyway. Parallel to all this, we see Reverend Bryce out in the woods, frantically wandering around and peering down into an old well. Not far away, Tom's son Evan is out having fun with his friends, including some tourist girls. Tom had told Evan to stay home, but guys, Evan is the most rebellious kid on this island, so staying home was never happening. Then Reverend Bryce appears in front of these kids, looking like he's in a trance, and mutters that there is evil here. Then he just wanders off, and Evan and friends don't take it seriously. On the other side, instead of going to the Sunset Cocktails event, Tom ends up back at his own house, where his phone had voicemails from both Wyke and Patricia. Patricia's message has her screaming at Tom about why he didn't show up to the cocktail party. Keep that detail in mind. Just then there's a knock and Marissa calls out to him from outside. By this point, Tom had started suspecting Marissa might actually be the sea hag tracking him. Marissa says she got his address from his office staff, but Tom won't have any of it. Marissa clearly wanted to come in, but Tom tells her to leave. We can see Marissa was a genuinely sweet person who came in a taxi with friends, and Tom had basically dismissed her in the most awkward way. Regardless, Marissa leaves and Tom stacks chairs against the front door, then grabs a baseball bat and parks himself on the sofa. Tom was getting seriously lethargic, like he was slowly going paralyzed. Then Tom gets a vision of his wife being there with him, and the next moment, the sea hag is already right in front of him. Yep guys, the sea hag climbs on Tom, and she positions herself right over his face. Tom can't do anything because, just like Wyke warned, Tom is basically fully paralyzed. Tom somehow manages to pull the recline lever on his sofa, which sends the hag tumbling backward, and then he crawls his way to the bathroom. The sea hag follows him in, but then Wyke suddenly appears in the house and takes the sea hag out with a gun. On impact, the hag shatters like black mold. So yes, Wyke saved Tom's life, and now Tom was officially a believer in this island's paranormal activity. We are then shown that Tom's phone has a voicemail from Reverend Bryce, saying, "I heard it, please forgive me, and hopefully God will forgive me too." Parallel to this, we hear a police call where the sheriff is summoning full backup to the cocktail party. What happened at that party? We find out in the next episode, which I'm also covering in this video. For now, episode 3 ends. Now episode 4 is called Beach Reads, and it starts 4 days earlier where we see Patricia near a book van. She's collecting book donations from the community. Patricia's watching her friends from a distance, and it's clear they don't give her the time of day. They even make fun of her. Among the donations is this one unique book titled Your Turn, written by Lucy Force. It's basically a self-help book that promises to destroy your old self and help you become a whole new person. Patricia shelves it in the self-help section. That night, Patricia goes to a friend Lenore's party, and Lenore is visibly less than thrilled to see her. Patricia sweetly tries to make conversation, but not a single friend bothers to respond. At this party, Patricia meets a woman named Shelby who only recently moved to the island, so Shelby actually talks to her. Shelby starts asking whether girls really did go missing on this island years ago. Patricia says yes and begins telling the story. So when Patricia was a kid, several of her female classmates started getting these strange calls where all you could hear was someone breathing on the line, and then it would cut. That was probably the boogeyman, guys. The same one Patricia mentioned in episode 1. One night, young Patricia was home alone when she heard someone on the floor below, and it might have been the boogeyman. Patricia ran and hid under her bed, which is why she survived. Otherwise, she would have ended up like the other girls. Now, while Patricia is telling this story, someone bumps into her and spills liquid all over her. Patricia heads to the bathroom to clean up, and when she comes back, all the ladies are side-eyeing her and whispering. Turns out, Patricia has been telling everyone for 25 years that the boogeyman came to her house and she somehow survived. The ladies can't stand it because girls actually couldn't make it in that incident, and Patricia has basically turned that tragedy into her own personal origin story, which these women find deeply disrespectful. One friend even says it to her face. One of my close friends couldn't make it because of that, and you've spent years turning it into your PR moment, which is exactly why no one talks to you. Regardless, Patricia heads home after being completely ignored at the party and finds the Your Turn book lying on her floor. She starts reading it. The first question asks what she likes and doesn't like about herself. Patricia writes that she's generous and kind-hearted, but her weakness is caring way too much about what others think. Then the book asks her to mark her insecurities. And finally, the book's suggestion is that Patricia could throw an amazing cocktail party that would make all her haters obsessed with her, because people always remember the person who throws a confidently incredible party. And just like that, Patricia decides she's throwing a cocktail party. She takes over the Sunset Cocktails event already being organized by the mayor's office and renames it Patricia's Cocktail Party, to be held at the Salty Whale restaurant. She wants a DJ, drinks, great food, the whole deal. She starts roping in her office co-workers for help, though the way Patricia was talking, it felt less like asking and more like issuing orders. Like Dale had to be the DJ, even though Dale knew absolutely nothing about DJing. We see Patricia blasting RSVPs to 156 people in town all at once, and she starts aggressively planning the party herself, following the book's instructions. She even goes to a bar to invite her friends, who again completely ignore her. At this point, Patricia's behavior was starting to spook even the mayor's office staff. But the sad reality was that not a single reply had come in out of 156 invites. By the end of the day, only 3 yes replies had arrived, and Patricia just sat in one spot in town reading her party planning book for hours. The sheriff even notices on CCTV that Patricia hasn't moved from that one spot all day, like she's in some kind of trance. Party night arrives, Patricia gets dressed with a tiara on, and Rosemary confronts her, saying Patricia is putting way too much weight on this event. The list of items Patricia had been ordering was straight up bizarre. Patricia immediately snaps at Rosemary, then snaps at Dale too because he can't figure out the DJ setup. Party time hits, and so far only a few locals have shown up. No tourists, no young crowd. Tom was also supposed to be there, and Patricia sends him an angry voicemail demanding he show up immediately. That's the same voicemail that played on Tom's phone when he got back home after seeing Marissa. Regardless, Patricia's party is flopping, but then one of her friends actually shows up. Patricia gets on the dance floor, but right in the middle of a song, an ad plays because Gail didn't have a premium subscription on the music app. Then suddenly young people start pouring into the party and the whole vibe turns around. Patricia serves everyone crab cakes, then has a nice chat with a handsome guy who seems into her. After that, Patricia confronts her friend's table, asking exactly why they hate her so much. Lenore drops the truth, that during the boogeyman incident, Lenore's close friends couldn't make it, and instead of honoring them, Patricia built a whole story out of it for herself. Lenore says her friend Samantha was stabbed by the boogeyman and crawled into a dryer to hide. The boogeyman switched the dryer on, and Samantha didn't make it. Another friend, Jen, was hiding beneath a pool cover to escape, but the boogeyman was already in the pool and got to her too. Then Lenore just lays into Patricia, screaming that hiding under a bed and surviving is a straight up lie, and she even mocks Patricia's tiara. All of that hits Patricia really hard, and she slips into the kitchen to cry. But then she spots her party book there, which says it's now time to serve the punch. Patricia immediately grabs the punch bowl and heads back out, and everyone starts drinking it. Slowly the party explodes. Music's pumping, Patricia's dancing, everyone is having a blast. Even Patricia's friends start dancing with her, which was genuinely surprising. The book then says it's time for a toast. Patricia needs to give a speech. She thanks everyone for coming, then reads from the book. Everyone is smiling. But when we see these people's reflections, all of their mouths are hanging wide open like they're possessed. Yep guys, something is seriously wrong here. And after Patricia's speech, everyone starts moving outside toward a bonfire. They all invite Patricia to join, and she says she'll check on the kitchen first. In the kitchen, Rosemary tells Patricia she really wanted to support this party, but she can't get behind what Patricia is actually doing. Rosemary even comments that Patricia's tiara is a little off. Patricia snaps at her, but then Sheriff Bashir walks in. He got a noise complaint and came to check. Bashir takes one look at Patricia in the kitchen and freezes, because Patricia wasn't chopping vegetables or anything normal. She had crows, rabbits, and other animals cut up and laid out. Yep guys, at this point Patricia snaps back to her senses and realizes she's wearing a crown made from animal horns, not a tiara at all. She runs into the bar area and the decorations look nothing like before. The whole setup looks like some kind of dark ritual space. The punch wasn't a normal drink either. It had animal parts and fur in it. Most shocking of all, the book Patricia had been using to plan this entire party wasn't a self-help book called Your Turn. It was clearly an ancient book of dark rituals. The pages had photos of ceremonies, and Patricia had unknowingly been following them step by step. The ritual's endgame was for the partygoers to walk to the bonfire and then all walk into the ocean together. Patricia rushes outside where all the guests are walking in a trance state straight toward the water. She tries to stop them, but everyone is completely under. The sheriff also shows up and tries to stop people, but the two of them can't hold back that many people alone. So the sheriff calls for backup on his walkie-talkie, which is exactly what we heard at the end of episode 3. Patricia realizes the book caused all this, so she tries to throw it into the bonfire, but she literally cannot let go of it, like the book is fused to her hand. So Patricia shoves both her hand and the book into the fire, which partially burns the book and weakens its grip. The book finally falls into the bonfire. The flames roar up, and at that moment, all the possessed people snapping back to their senses. Once conscious, Lenore immediately blames Patricia, accusing her of spiking the punch with drugs. After all this, Patricia was completely shattered and heading home alone when Vike and Tom pull up to give her a ride. These two are heading to Reverend Bryce's church because, if you remember at the end of the last episode, Bryce had left that strange voicemail for Tom. So yes, Tom, Vike and Patricia arrive at the church and find Bryce's room in total disarray. There's a single page burning that Tom picks up, and they start going through the room. Then the door swings open, and behind it, Bryce is hanging, already gone. And that's where episode 4 ends. This episode had Patricia thinking she was reading a self-help book and throwing a fun party. But in reality, she was following a witchcraft manual. Because she was under the book's influence, she couldn't see reality for what it was. And if you notice, after everyone drank the punch, they all kind of slipped into a trance. Rosemary hadn't drunk any, so she was unaffected. In the end, the book was about to send a huge group of people to a terrible end. But the sheriff arrived just in time for Patricia to come back to her senses and get the situation under control. With that, we're moving on to the next episode. So episode 5 is called What to Expect on Your Trip, and it opens with an old video of a man stumbling through a snowy wilderness, starving and desperate. He suddenly spots some dark mushrooms and starts eating them, and that's where the scene cuts. Back in Widow's Bay, by this point Vic, Tom and Patricia all believe there are genuine paranormal forces on this island. So Tom has a curfew announced. From 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. nobody goes out. The announcement doesn't go over well with the townspeople or the tourists, because tourists came here to explore, not sit in a hotel room. The locals' businesses were also booming because of tourists, so curfew would hurt them too. There were even fireworks planned for tonight, now cancelled because of the curfew. After that, Tom heads to Reverend Bryce's wake, and before leaving, he tells his son Evan to stay at his office with Ruth watching him. But we all know Ruth's going to struggle to keep watch, and sure enough, the second Tom's gone, Evan bolts. So yes, Tom attends the wake, then goes through Bryce's room with Wyke and Patricia. Before his end, Bryce had scratched the words "My eye is open" into his table. There were several notes, plus one singed, almost blank page that Wyke picks up. Clearly, Bryce had burned a lot of things before his end. Tom then finds a handkerchief in the room containing some mushrooms. And guys, those are the exact same mushrooms from the beginning of this episode. Tom reasons that before his end, Bryce had called Tom, so he must have called other numbers too. They check the redial list and find a number which they call. A man picks up on the other end. Patricia says Bryce gave her this number and she'd like to make an appointment. The man asks if she wants one and gives her an address right there on the island, 12 Birch Street. The three of them immediately head there and meet a guy named Todd O'Connor, who calls himself a shaman. By the way, this shaman was actually Patricia's old classmate, and in reality the guy deals drugs. The shaman asks what they're looking for. He's got everything. Tom immediately shows him the mushrooms found in Bryce's room, and the shaman recognizes them instantly. He says he'll do any substance, but not those mushrooms, because they give you an absolutely terrifying trip. They take you somewhere people call true sight, like your third eye has been blasted wide open, and these mushrooms only grow on this island. It was clear that when we saw Reverend Bryce wandering in the woods that night, he was on this mushroom, and then he did something terrible to himself. The shaman mentions his friend Brian Morrison also took these mushrooms and during his trip had visions that changed him forever. He never told anyone what he saw, but after that one trip he stopped fighting, started treating his girlfriend better, and his motor skills deteriorated. During his trips, Brian would draw the same thing over and over, a creepy hand drawing. At this point, Wyke asks if the shaman can prepare a consumable drug from the mushroom, and the shaman says he'll do it for $35. Just like that, Wyke tells him to make it. His plan is to take the mushroom trip and hopefully unlock the island's secrets through visions. Tom is totally against this, but Wyke says he's testing it on himself, so Tom shouldn't have a problem with it. In the middle of all this, Tom gets word that the townspeople are furious about the curfew and are about to break it. Fireworks are still happening tonight. This news gets Tom agitated, and the shaman offers Tom something to drink. Tom downs it, and it turns out the shaman had mixed the mushroom drug into that drink. Yep guys, the shaman had actually gotten Tom and Wyke mixed up, so he dosed Tom thinking he was giving it to Wyke. Tom's mind starts unraveling, and the shaman tells him to rest in a back room because this trip lasts 12 hours. It was the room where people chill out during their trips. The shaman warns Tom, do whatever you want in there, but whatever you do, do not look at yourself in the mirror. At this point, Tom is already freaking out. He tries to make himself vomit but has no idea how to do it. Tom was also anxious because he needed to get back to his mayor's office to enforce the curfew, so he asks Patricia to take him there. After that, Tom blanks out, and when he comes back, he's already in Patricia's car heading to the office. He blanks out again, and when his mind kicks back on, Patricia has already gotten him there. There, Patricia looks worried because, as expected, Tom's son had gone missing from the office. Dale sees Tom and asks what happened to him, and we viewers know Tom is deep in that mushroom trip for the next 12 hours. Worth noting, Tom was hearing strange sounds that nobody else could hear. The sheriff comes by because the townspeople are breaking the curfew and he has no idea what to do. Tom's employees also come to talk to him, but Tom is just sitting there in a daze. He's tripping. Now, as for Evan, he and his friends and a few tourist girls were chilling in a car near a house with a very dark history. That's the boogeyman's house, where the boogeyman from that old story unalived several girls on this island years ago. According to legend, when the boogeyman was shot, he wouldn't go down, so they buried him in the house's basement and sealed the whole thing in concrete. Anyway, on another side, we see Wyke visiting a woman named Gier, who can restore burnt papers and read what was on them. Wyke had brought a page from Bryce's office which Gier examines. She's able to read the writing, which said something like, "I don't know what curse is on this island, but I know it lies within the cylinder my husband wears around his neck. We will all be finished, and I am afraid. I don't know how, but I know who. He is right in front of me, and I am rushing to write this," and then it trails off. These words didn't make a whole lot of sense beyond one key thing. Someone's husband wears a cylinder around his neck and the island's curse is connected to it. Anyway, back to Tom. Dale was with him and Tom was imagining Dale as something ghostly, like his eyes had gone completely black. Then Tom passes out and when his mind comes back online, he's in a meeting with town business people. They are furious about the curfew. You can't have a lockdown when tourists are around. The inn owner Kurt was most agitated and Tom sat there saying absolutely nothing. Everyone ends up deciding among themselves that they're ignoring the curfew and the fireworks are happening. Tom blanks out again and when he comes back the room is empty, everyone's gone. On another side, Evan and his crew are discussing how anyone who goes into the boogeyman's house never comes back. Egged on and wanting to impress the girls, Evan decides he's going in. He walks toward the house. But just before he steps inside, the sheriff shows up and stops him. Evan is told to clear out and honestly guys, Evan just dodged something absolutely terrifying. There's no way he would have made it out of that house alive. By this point it was crystal clear. This island is genuinely deeply cursed. Now as for Tom, he finds himself in Gur's office where Gur, Vike and Patricia are present. They're trying to make sense of the writing on the burned page. Gur says the page references a plague and the only plague on the island was during 1702. Gur pulls out a historical notebook from the island and it turns out the page was clearly torn from this very notebook. It fit right in. Whose notebook was this? It belonged to Sarah Westcott Warren, wife of Widow's Bay's founder, Richard Warren, which means Richard Warren had some kind of cylinder around his neck and the island's curse is linked to it. Since Richard Warren passed away centuries ago, they'd probably have to find his remains because whatever was in that cylinder was likely buried with him. We also see an old painting of Richard showing him wearing something around his neck and we notice that Patricia had tied a kind of leash on Tom's hand and Tom had started drawing that same creepy hand image over and over. Suddenly Tom snaps and panics about where his son Evan is and tries to bolt outside. But then Tom probably phases out again because the next scene shows him in the backseat of Rosemary's car. Rosemary is driving Tom home and they stop at a gas station. Next thing, Rosemary appears to have gone inside the shop and we notice Tom's shirt has what looks like crimson fluid on it. Tom stumbles into the store and the employee is mopping up liquid off the floor. The place looks like a fight broke out. The fridge door is smashed. The store employee loses it when he sees Tom and Tom notices his shoe is near the employee's feet. Tom lunges to grab it and that's where the scene cuts. So clearly while tripping, Tom had trashed this store, which is how the crimson fluid got on his shirt. Of course, Tom has no memory of it. He keeps blacking out. Regardless, Rosemary drives Tom all the way home where he waits for Evan. A while later, Evan comes home with his friends and Tom starts staring at the car in this creepy, unhinged way. Evan and his friends feel super uncomfortable, especially embarrassing with the girls there seeing Tom act so weird. When Evan gets out, Tom snaps at him for running off with friends again and Evan fires back. They go at it hard with Evan's burning question being why he has never been allowed to leave this island. Tom doesn't answer. He just heads straight upstairs to the bathroom. In the bathroom, Tom starts having visions of the past, back when his wife Lauren was alive and pregnant with Evan. During the pregnancy, Tom and Lauren were out on a boat leaving the island and suddenly Lauren lost her vision. Tom turned the boat around and rushed Lauren to the hospital where she delivered the baby. The baby was completely fine but Lauren wasn't doing well. She was alive but staring blankly in one direction. Tom cries remembering all this and prays for God to keep his son safe. Then something comes very close to Tom and the look on his face is pure shock. We never see what it is, just a low, eerie growl, and that's where episode 5 ends. So episode 6 is called Our History, and just like the name suggests, this episode dives deep into the history of Widow's Bay. The story starts in 1702, where we see a woman named Sarah Westcott arriving at Widow's Bay by ship. Sarah was from the mainland, coming to marry Widow's Bay's founder, Richard Warren. Sarah always wrote everything in her diary, and she had heard great things about Richard. So Sarah arrives, and the man who came to receive her says the people here only survived because of Richard. Sarah rides into town and sees homes with sick people inside, marked with big red X's on the doors. It was clear that some kind of plague or dangerous illness was spreading. In case you're wondering why Richard, living on the island, would marry someone from the mainland, well, Richard had been married before and his first wife had recently passed. With Widow's Bay's population being pretty thin, finding a new wife was a challenge, so Richard went with Sarah from the mainland. Sarah was excited, but when the town's Pastor Collins came to bless her, he said if Sarah ever needed help, she could come to him. That was a slightly odd thing to say. Like Sarah's marrying the town founder, what kind of help would she need? Regardless, Sarah finally meets Richard and they get married. On the first night home, Sarah finds that Richard has 5 children named Thomas, John, Cromwell, Holyoke and Francis. I listed those in order, with Thomas being the oldest and Francis the youngest. Sarah notices Richard is a very strange man, always cold and emotionless. He basically treats Sarah like she's there to follow orders, not like a wife but more like a servant. Here, Sarah sees Francis holding a doll and gives her a brooch that came from Sarah's own mother. That night, Sarah's sleep is broken and she discovers Richard in a bizarre pose performing some kind of ritual. His eyes were white, he was wearing a cylindrical thing around his neck and had extracted some dark substance from it. Richard notices Sarah and tells her to leave. Whatever ritual Richard was doing, it was deeply dark. The next day, Sarah watches another body being buried in town, meaning whatever plague was here, it was brutal. From talking to a local woman, Sarah learns the town physician couldn't save the sick people either. That night, a local man named Ezra Lowry comes to Richard's house complaining that 3 people couldn't make it this week after the fog rolled in. But Richard was brushing it all off, saying everything would be fine, people should stay out of the fog and so on. From their conversation, we learn a man named Cornelius had come down with the illness. Initially, he just got headaches. The headache lasted 5 days, and by the 5th day, Cornelius's eyes had gone completely yellow and he had a fever. The town physician Otis told him to take warm baths. But when Otis came to check on him the next day, he found that Cornelius had violently driven his fingers into his wife's skull. Now, Sarah was right there hearing all this, and at that point, Richard tells her to go upstairs to her room. Sarah listens from the stairs as Ezra tells Richard to tame this entity, make it obey and stop all of this. Then Ezra points out how Richard keeps kissing his necklace like it's some kind of cross, but it's not a cross. It's more of a cylindrical shape, something else entirely. At this point, Richard is done with Ezra's questions and he attacks Ezra with his stick and takes him out. Yep guys, Sarah is completely horrified and runs back to her room pretending to be asleep. The next morning, there's no trace of Ezra or any crimson liquid anywhere in the house. Richard finished him and wiped all the evidence. By now, Sarah was truly terrified, and while searching the house, she finds a secret passage that leads down to the basement, where the very stick Richard used on Ezra is clearly visible. Sarah runs straight to Pastor Collins and tells him everything, because you'll remember, Pastor Collins had said if Sarah ever needed help, she could come to him. Hearing all this, Pastor Collins says he'd already had suspicions about Richard, that Richard might be in league with the devil himself. Sarah says she needs to get off this island no matter what. She'd rather go back to her terrible father's attic than stay with Richard. Pastor Collins says it's not a coincidence that Sarah came here. Now Sarah needs to help deal with Richard. Tonight, Pastor Collins tells her, leave the front door unlocked and he'll handle the rest. So yes, that night, Sarah does exactly that. She sends the children to bed early. Late at night, men sent by Pastor Collins enter the house and attack Richard with sharp tools while he sleeps. Sarah runs downstairs in terror. And despite everything, Richard was still alive. Incredibly, he walked off the attack and took out all the attackers. His wounds even healed completely, and he tells Sarah she is never leaving this house again. Richard vows to hunt down whoever masterminded the attack, and no one can leave this island. But Sarah had already made up her mind that she had to escape. The problem was Richard had locked the house from the outside when he left the next morning. Sarah goes down through the secret basement and ventures through the caves. She finds a room with a chair, ropes, crimson stains, and some kind of door in front of it. The sight terrifies her so much that she runs out and escapes through a different exit, one that comes out through the well outside the house. Sarah is finally outside. She runs straight to Pastor Collins, who is meeting with several townspeople. Sarah tells them Richard is literally the devil, because after all those attacks, he was still walking without a scratch. Pastor Collins says tonight they'll try again, and this time Sarah needs to mix a substance into Richard's drink to make him lose consciousness. Then Collins and his men will enter through the well's secret passage and deal with Richard for good. After that, Collins will arrange a ship for Sarah to escape to the mainland. Sarah agrees to all of it, goes home and writes everything in her journal. This is the same page Wyke and Jia were reading in the present, where Sarah wrote about the cylindrical thing around Richard's neck being the root of all the evil. Then Richard appears and takes the journal, saying he wants to read it. So yes, Richard starts reading the journal, and the early pages don't give anything away. By dinner time, Sarah feeds the children and sends them upstairs. She mixes the substance Pastor Collins gave her into Richard's drink. Richard wasn't drinking it, so Sarah tries to seduce him into drinking. Richard, in his excitement, tries to make Sarah drink it too, but notices she's not actually swallowing it. Richard realizes his wife is plotting against him, and he grabs Sarah by the throat, trying to end her. Then Richard's son Thomas runs in and attacks his own father to save Sarah, making it very clear their mother was unalived by Richard. After that, Sarah runs with all 5 children down to the seashore where a small boat has been prepared. The physician's wife suddenly appears before them, behaving completely erratically. Another victim of the plague. She even tries to attack Sarah, but Sarah hits her with a stick and knocks her into the water. Then Sarah and the children get on the boat and push off. Meanwhile, Pastor Collins and his men tie Richard down. Knowing that finishing him was impossible, they plan to bury him alive. Before being buried, Richard shouts that the entity spoke to him through the mushrooms, that they need to honor the pact, and that everything he did was for the good of Widow's Bay. In the end, Richard cries out, "Do not punish my children for my sins." Pastor Collins says Richard's wife has taken his children and is sailing to the mainland. Hearing that, Richard says his children will never be able to leave the island. At that, Pastor Collins and his men bury Richard alive. The story then snaps to the present, where Wick is digging in the cemetery and finds Richard's grave. And that's where episode 6 ends. This episode showed us Widow's Bay's dark past, though things are still not completely clear. Also, whenever the past story played out, the video's aspect ratio shifted to 4:3, like those old classic films. So episode 7 is called Seasickness, and it opens with Mayor Tom passed out on his bathroom floor. Tom comes to, the mushroom trip has finally worn off. He immediately goes to meet Patricia and Wyke, and Tom learns these two dug up founder Richard Warren's grave and brought it home. Tom is absolutely floored by this, but Wyke then tells him Richard has been alive in that grave for over 200 years and is sitting in the room upstairs right now. Tom's mind is completely broken by this information, and on top of that, Tom is the one who has to talk to Richard because Richard will only speak with Widow's Bay's leader. Tom's technically the leader as mayor. Also, Richard can only communicate by writing, and Wyke had also taken the cylindrical locket from around Richard's neck and wrapped it in cloth to hand to Tom so Tom could get Richard to open it himself. So reluctantly, Tom goes upstairs where Richard is genuinely alive, though looking like something straight out of a zombie nightmare. Tom tries to communicate through writing, but Richard suddenly just starts talking. Tom's first question was naturally how Richard has been alive in a grave for over 200 years. Richard says he was tricked by the devil and the devil's power is what has kept him alive all this time. Tom asks Richard to open the cylindrical locket, and Richard first asks Tom to untie his restraints. Tom nervously sets Richard free, and Richard opens the locket. A paper falls out. Something was written on it, plus a stick figure drawing Tom can't make sense of, and Richard says this was his salvation. Richard explains that back in his time, the 1700s, things on the island were so desperate that people had nothing to eat. People were even consuming bodies, and Richard himself was about to do something terrible. But then Richard spotted a mushroom, the very same one Tom accidentally consumed, and the same one from that early scene where a man in a snowy wilderness eats dark mushrooms. That was Richard's origin. After eating the mushroom, Richard gave thanks to God, but what came to him was not God. It was a demon, and this demon might actually be the island itself. This demon was just as starving as Richard was, and so Richard signed a pact with the demon using his own crimson fluid and bodily substances. The paper Tom is holding is that very pact. Tom first tries to put down the disgusting paper knowing what it was signed with. Then Tom asks what Richard offered the demon in return. Richard doesn't answer directly, but it's clear he promised something massive, though Richard claims his pact is what allowed the people of this island to survive all this time. Tom pushes back, saying the pact was terrible because people born on the island still can't ever leave. Richard just says this demon knows that desperate people do desperate things. After that, Tom takes Richard to the museum where his children's dolls and belongings have been preserved. There's even a statue of Sarah there, into whose eyes Richard drives his finger, because Sarah was the one who took his children away. And those children would have ended as they crossed the island's boundary, since no one born here can believe it. The island's maritime boundary is clearly marked in the ocean, and sailors born on the island never sail past it. Richard says that as long as his bloodline remains alive in this world, the deal holds and the curse continues. But Richard's children perished back in 1702, and now only Richard himself is left, meaning once Richard is gone, the island's curse goes with him. How do you finish Richard? You take him sailing past the island's boundary. Crossing it will cause Richard to age rapidly and not make it. Tom can actually do this since he wasn't born on the island and regularly goes to the mainland. Vike initially refuses to give his boat for this, but Tom talks him into it. Tom then asks Richard to get back in the coffin until they're on board Vike's boat, because a living Richard walking around town would send the whole island into absolute chaos. On the other side, Patricia goes to deal with Sheriff Bashir, who had shown up, and takes off in his car with the sheriff chasing after her. With the sheriff gone, Tom and Vike get on the boat with Richard sealed in the coffin. Vike points out on a map the location of the boundary in the ocean. Tom will transfer Richard onto a small vessel near the boundary, then cross it, which will finish Richard and break the island's curse. Worth noting, Vic was also born on this island, so he can't cross the boundary either. On another side, Tom's son Evan was home with a girl named Kelly, a tourist. They were talking about how wild Tom is. Kelly suggests they go through Tom's stuff. They find a locked box. Kelly picks the lock, and inside are letters and photos. In the photos, Evan sees his mum, and a very young Evan is in them too. Now this was a shocking reveal, because Tom had always told Evan that his mother didn't make it during childbirth, but the photos clearly showed she was alive for years after Evan was born. On another side, the sheriff had caught Patricia and had her in his car, not pressing charges, just asking point blank what is actually going on. Patricia starts spilling everything to the sheriff, how this island is cursed and how they're trying to break that curse. Hearing all this, the sheriff was like, bro, I don't want to know any of this because I'm giving my 1 week notice and getting out of this place. He literally just leaves Patricia there, saying, do whatever you want, don't tell me about it, and don't go disturbing the folks on this island. Patricia nods along and steps out of the sheriff's car. On the other side, out on the sea, strange sounds were coming through the radio on Vike's boat. And Vike says, don't pay attention to these calls. It's just the island messing with us. Vike heads down to the lower floor of the boat to check things out. And meanwhile, Richard starts asking Tom to let him out of the coffin. Tom wasn't sure whether he should free Richard, because Vike had made it crystal clear. Richard stays locked in that coffin until they cross the border. Tom rushes over to Vike and asks if he can let Richard out, since Richard has agreed to all their terms. Vike was like, no. And actually, right here is where Vike starts telling a story from his childhood. He pulls out an old photo of himself at 16. In the photo was his best friend Mark and Mark's sister Gary. Vic had feelings for Jerry back then, and honestly, still does. Vic explains that back in those days, the island was going through a really rough patch. Lockdowns, people vanishing, the whole deal. Then one day, Vic and 4 of his friends stole a boat and headed out on a fishing expedition. Out in the ocean, something slammed into the bottom of their boat and just flipped it over. Vic's buddy Ricky screamed that he spotted a massive tentacle in the water, and hearing that, everyone absolutely lost it. Vic started swimming away as fast as he could, and then he felt it. The creature had grabbed his leg underwater. It started dragging Vic down, and Mark was getting pulled too, screaming for help. Both Mark and Vic were going under, and in a desperate move, Vic kicked Mark and somehow made it out alive. But Mark couldn't make it. That guilt has haunted Vic ever since. He didn't save his friend, he kicked him away just to save himself. So the whole point of Vic telling this story was to warn Tom, don't open that coffin because Richard could turn on them at any moment. But Tom was like, yeah, I already opened the coffin and let Richard out, just came to let you know. Vic was furious hearing that, but Richard was so weak at this point that he couldn't really do much. They give Richard some food and he eats it like an absolute animal. Dude hadn't eaten in centuries. But as they get closer to the border, Richard starts getting cold feet, meaning friends, Richard no longer wanted this to end. Then a wave slams into their boat, snapping the small attached dinghy clean off. And as if that wasn't wild enough, Richard full-on attacks Wyke and Tom because now he wants to survive. They go at it, and Wyke and Tom together barely manage to shove Richard back into the coffin. During all of this chaos, Wyke is about to tumble into the water, and the boat is dangerously close to the border. If the boat crossed the border with Wyke on it, he wouldn't make it either. So Tom tosses him a flotation tube and kicks him overboard before they hit the borderline. Then Tom crosses the border himself, taking the boat and Richard with him. The moment they cross, Richard's body in the coffin crumbles into nothing but ash and bones. Meaning, friends, Richard is done. And with him, the island's curse is finally finished. Tom then turns the boat around and comes back inside the border, searching the water for Wyke. At first, he can't spot him anywhere, but then Wyke uses the flotation tube to stay afloat and climbs back onto the boat himself. These two are absolutely stoked because they just saved the island. In the final scene of the episode, we cut to the Widow's Bay Inn, where an angry guest is storming out because the service was terrible. In the background, we catch a glimpse of a painting, a small child swimming in the water, with a boat behind it carrying more children. Someone is reaching out with a piece of wood to save that child, and that's where the episode ends. Now friends, what's the point of showing this painting? Well, in my opinion, this painting is depicting that 17-on-2 incident when Sarah was escaping on a boat with Richard's 5 children. The kids would have perished crossing the border, but based on the painting, it looks like one child may have turned back before reaching it. That child probably survived, then secretly lived out their life on the island. This means Richard's bloodline wasn't actually wiped out, friends. And that's probably why the curse didn't truly end even after Richard was gone. Now, this is just my theory, but it's looking pretty solid because in episode 8, it is crystal clear that the curse is still very much alive. So without any further delay, let's move on to episode 8, which is titled Your Baggage. This episode opens with Vic, Tom, and Patricia all meeting up at a bar, and all 3 of them are absolutely pumped because as far as they are concerned, they've broken the island's curse for good. The 3 of them go off on their merry ways, but friends, all 3 of them are about to get hit with some serious shocks. First, let's talk Tom. The moment he gets home, Evan starts grilling him with questions about why Tom has been lying about his mom all this time. Evan shows Tom the photos and letters he found inside Tom's locked box. Tom tells Evan that even though his mom was technically alive for a few years after Evan was born, she was never really normal after that, not in the real sense. She had suffered a preeclampsia-induced stroke, and it wasn't safe to have her around. So Tom had placed his wife, Evan's mom, in a facility on the island called the Home, which was basically a mental asylum. Shortly after, Evan's mom couldn't make it there due to a brain aneurysm. At this point, Evan reads some of his mom's letters and Tom shows him a few more photos. Evan asks why they can't just leave the island, and Tom was like, "Starting today, we can." He actually brought 2 Red Sox tickets so he and Evan could watch a game on the mainland together. Seeing all this, Evan gets genuinely happy, and it was clear that Tom and Evan were finally starting to bond. On the other side, Week heads to the museum to meet Gary, and he shows her that same old photo. In the photo, there's 16-year-old Week, young Gary, and her brother Mike. Then Gary's husband shows up out of nowhere, and that made things super awkward for Week, so Week starts to leave. But right then he notices one of the museum's display cases is shattered. Inside it used to be a mask, the killer's mask, and now the mask is gone, stolen. If you're wondering which killer I'm talking about, I mean the boogeyman who unalived several girls on this island years ago and had also attacked Patricia before. Week sees this and immediately heads straight for the boogeyman's sealed house, where he finds the front door wide open. The basement has been busted out as if the boogeyman has already escaped, and if he got out, he must have been the one who swiped his mask from the museum. Now as for Patricia, she's chilling at home when the alarm on her book truck goes off outside. She heads out to turn it off, comes back inside, and gets this feeling that someone might be in her house. That feeling hit because one of her rooms was open, a room that had been closed before. Patricia goes downstairs, grabs her taser, which is only at 2% charge. She quietly steps outside outside her house, and right then, the boogeyman walks out wearing his mask, holding a blade. Yep, friends, the boogeyman is back, and Patricia takes off running. He's chasing her down, and Patricia sprints all the way to Wyke's house, but nobody answers when she knocks. Meanwhile, Wyke had already headed over to Patricia's place looking for her, and he finds her house wide open, and Patricia herself is nowhere to be found. Anyway, Patricia runs to her friend's house and tells her the boogeyman is after her. Her friend starts saying again that Patricia is making things up, and that seriously irritates her. Patricia's friend asks if back in childhood Patricia really did get those calls from the boogeyman, and Patricia was like, okay, I lied about the calls back then, but the boogeyman really did come after me even then, and he's coming after me right now too. Chris tells Patricia to get out of her house, and at this point Patricia gets fed up and shoves Chris to the ground. Then Patricia steps outside and spots the boogeyman in the upper window of Chris's house. Patricia warns her friends that the boogeyman is in the very house they're standing in, but these people were not exactly the listening type. After that, the boogeyman smashes through the upper window and jumps down to the lower floor, survives the fall, and starts going after Patricia again. Patricia runs, then trips and gets tangled in her own taser wire, which lets the boogeyman get dangerously close. But just before he can get to her, a car slams right into the boogeyman. The impact knocks him down, and Patricia loses consciousness too. When Patricia comes to, she's surrounded by an ambulance and 2 medics. But then the boogeyman gets back up and unalives one of the medics. Patricia bolts and makes it to a gas station. Inside the store were the sheriff and an employee. Patricia tells the employee to switch on pump number 3. As the boogeyman closes in, Patricia hits the pump and drenches the ground in fuel, then uses her taser to set it on fire. The boogeyman gets caught in the flames while the employee and the sheriff watch from inside the store. This absolute genius employee then grabs a fire extinguisher and puts out the boogeyman's fire, after which the boogeyman picks him up and launches him across the lot. I mean, the boogeyman's strength is just not human. By now, the sheriff comes out with a shotgun aimed at the boogeyman, but not only does the boogeyman snatch the gun away, he also slashes the sheriff with his blade. Before the boogeyman could finish off the sheriff, Patricia grabs the shotgun and unloads it right into the boogeyman. An ambulance then arrives and restrains the boogeyman, while Patricia still has the gun trained on him, which is the right call because you just know the boogeyman was about to get back up. After that, the boogeyman is taken straight to a cremation center and cremated on the spot, meaning all that's left now is ash. Hopefully there's no coming back from that. After all this, Patricia heads to the hospital where the sheriff is admitted, along with everyone else the boogeyman had attacked. The sheriff's wife is there too, and we see that she's pregnant, pretty much at the very final stage. Patricia rushes over to the sheriff and tells him, no matter what, do not let your baby be born on Widow's Bay. Take your wife to the mainland. That's where the childbirth needs to happen. But think about this, friends. How is an injured sheriff supposed to get to the mainland, especially when his wife could go into labor any minute? Meanwhile, Tom and Evan are having a great time together when Wyke shows up at Tom's place. Wyke tells Tom that the curse is not over yet, and Tom is absolutely shocked. And that's where episode 8 wraps up. So episode 9 is titled Emergency Shelter, and the story kicks off in 1702. I told you that Sarah William was on a boat escaping with Richard's 5 children, right? Well, this scene is from that very escape. Their boat is at the edge of Widow's Bay Island territory, and a heavy fog has rolled in over everything. Through the fog, Richard's eldest son starts bleeding black from his nose, and we all know why. People born on the island simply cannot cross its border. If they do, all 5 children will perish. That's probably exactly what happened. But friends, one of my predictions turned out to be right. Among the 5 children, the youngest one, a girl named Frances, falls overboard into the water. Frances can't get back onto the boat, and she has a yellow pendant on her, which I want you to keep in mind. In short, Richard's other 4 children most likely perished crossing the island's border, but Frances fell into the water and survived. What happened to Frances after that? I'll get to that in just a moment. For now, the story jumps to the present, where Widow's Bay is getting absolutely hammered by nasty weather, with a massive storm clearly rolling in. Patricia is telling Tom that they need to hit the island's siren so everyone can get to the shelter and stay safe. On top of that, Widow's Bay has completely lost its connection to the mainland. one of Widows Bay's elders is making things even scarier, telling Tom that back in 1783 the storm that hit started with dark, ugly clouds, and then flooding, tornadoes, everything tearing people apart. Children were ripped right out of their mother's arms. In short, this elder is just cranking the fear factor up even more. In the middle of all this tension, Tom rips a large portrait off the wall in his office, except it falls right back on top of him. Patricia then notices that the woman in the portrait is missing one finger. This triggers a memory. She recalls that Frances Warren from the 1700s was also missing a finger because as a child, one of her brothers had a wagon wheel run over it. That detail was written in Sarah Warren's journal. The point is, Frances must have survived and lived her life on this island as a descendant of Richard, which is exactly why her portrait is hanging right there. So yes, they now need to trace Frances Warren's complete bloodline, and only Rosemary can do that because she holds the town's genealogy records. But the real question is, if they do find a living descendant of Richard's bloodline, are they really going to end that person's life to save the island? That question goes unanswered for now, but Tom Loftis finally gets the Widow's Bay siren sounded. Meanwhile, Sheriff Bashir was planning to leave the island with his wife Shell because she could go into labor any second, and Bashir absolutely did not want his child born on this island. But the siren had already gone off, friends, and on top of that, the storm was so brutal that sea travel was not safe from any angle. So Shell puts her foot down and says she's not going anywhere. The sea is too dangerous right now. But who's going to explain to Shell that if her baby is born on this island, that child may never be able to leave? Bashir is still trying to find a way off, but Wyke explains to him that boats are going down out there. There's just no way out anymore. Anyway, with the siren going, all the island's residents and tourists are brought to the shelter, and already the island is having electrical issues because of the storm. The storm is overpowering the grid and it's just failing. The generator is malfunctioning too, and it can only keep the lights going in the shelter for about half an hour. The generator guy mentions that Garrett at the lighthouse might have a replacement generator, so Tom should try reaching him. Tom immediately tries connecting with Garrett on the walkie-talkie, but the signal is not coming through clearly at all. So Tom decides to head out into the storm himself toward the lighthouse. Except Garrett had already left the lighthouse and was on his way to the emergency town hall. Garrett and Tom spot each other through binoculars, and right then Tom notices the sky has literally gone black with dark clouds and tornadoes, exactly like that elder had warned. Whatever the case, Tom links up with Garrett here, and the shaman also comes sprinting over to them, but then a tornado just picks up the shaman and carries him away. The shaman couldn't make it, friends. At this point, Tom, his son Evan, Garrett, Bikir's wife, and all the remaining townspeople are safe inside the shelter at the town hall, but for how long, nobody can say. Across the whole town, only old Ruth refused to come to the shelter because she didn't want to leave her home. Ruth is just built different. She acts weird at Tom's office too. By this point, Rosemary had finished her research and pulled out the complete bloodline of Richard's daughter Frances. Voight, Patricia, and Tom all rush over to Rosemary, who has a full projector situation set up. Rosemary reveals that there is indeed a woman currently on this island who is Richard's last living descendant, but before naming her, she walks them through the entire Warren lineage. I'll just hit the key points for you. The full lineage will be on screen, so pause if you want to read it all. So Richard Warren's first marriage was to Sybil, and they had 2 children, both of whom perished when they arrived on the island. Then came 5 more children, 4 of whom perished crossing out of the island's border, but Frances fell into the water and survived. Frances washed up right back on the shores of Widow's Bay, where she was found by a man named Barnabas Fisher. Barnabas took Frances in and raised her, but when Frances turned 14, he started looking at her differently, meaning Barnabas ended up marrying Frances, which is genuinely disturbing. Shortly after, Barnabas couldn't make it. His entire whaling business passed to Frances, and she also had a son with Barnabas named Jonathan. Jonathan grew up, got married, but unfortunately many of his children didn't make it. One daughter named Sophia survived. She married a man named Brion and had 6 children who also went on to have children of their own. But then during a swimming trip, most of the family couldn't make it. The family kept going forward, and at one point 2 siblings in the family got a little too close to each other, if you know what I mean. More generations came and went, and finally Rosemary reveals that in the present day, only one person remains from Richard Warren's bloodline. And that person is none other than Ruth. Yes, friends, old Ruth never married in her entire life, which is why this lineage didn't continue further, and that means if Ruth couldn't make it, the island's curse would end with her too. Ruth had been Miss Widow's Bay back in 1959, and right now she works at City Hall. And keep in mind, Ruth is the only person who refused to come to the shelter even with this storm raging. At this point, there's a heavy discussion between Wyke, Tom, and Patricia. Wyke wants to end Ruth for the sake of the island, but Patricia was like, we cannot take that kind of drastic step. Tom himself was torn, but seeing the state of the people on the island, somewhere he was leaning toward ending Ruth. In fact, Tom leaves the shelter and starts heading toward Ruth's house. And that's where episode 9 ends. Now, episode 10 is titled We Hope You Enjoyed Your Time, and it opens with Tom pulling up Ruth's medical records. Tom was hoping Ruth had cancer or something, so that even if he ended her, he wouldn't feel as guilty, because he'd be doing it for the greater good to someone already on their way out anyway. But friends, despite her age, the medical records showed Ruth is in insanely good health. However, the records did mention 2 medications she takes daily, and these 2 should never be taken together. Seeing this, Tom hatches a plan to give Ruth both medications at the same time. So yes, Tom finally enters Ruth's house and finds that even in the middle of this wild storm, Ruth is on a treadmill walking away. She's not just exceptionally fit, her calendar has events marked for every single day. This tells us Ruth is living life to the absolute fullest. She even helps her neighbor up and down the stairs every single day, and Ruth herself sprints up those stairs like a young woman. Seeing all this, guilt starts creeping in on Tom, because if he ends Ruth, he's ending a perfectly healthy, vibrant person. On the other side, Wyke and Patricia are inside the shelter rationing the packaged food. Rosemary is with them and mentions that the woman who had her position before her had warned Rosemary never go into the shelter. Meanwhile, in another room of the shelter, Sheriff Bashir is with his wife Shell, and the doctor makes it very clear that Shell will most likely deliver today. Now, while Patricia is handing out blankets to people, she finds an old note tucked inside one of them. It reads, "If you're reading this note, I'm already gone." This freaks Patricia out, and friends, keep this note in mind. Now the people inside the shelter, residents and tourists alike, are starting to get seriously restless. That same elder is scaring everyone again, saying the storm here can last for days. Patricia senses the tension rising and asks Gail to find some card games or board games in the shelter to distract people. Also inside the shelter are Evan, his tourist love interest Kelly, and his friend PJ. PJ tells Evan and Kelly he's found a secret way out of the shelter and proposes that all 3 of them sneak out and have some fun. Evan and Kelly agree, and they head toward a hidden window in the shelter with a staircase on the other side, leading down into a narrow shaft like a slim elevator shaft. None of them had any clue where these stairs would take them, but they go down anyway. A guy named Ken, who works as a custodian at the mayor's office, had spotted them sneaking around and follows them. Meanwhile, Gail is hunting for board games and stumbles into a room that looks like some kind of detention center. There's a screen and an old projector in there. Gail finds some old reels labeled "For Them" and plays them. In the video, we see a man saying something like this: "You have been selected for the offering. You were chosen through a very fair and rigorous selection process by a committee of your peers. There could be many reasons for your selection. Perhaps you committed a crime, or you owe something to society, or some other reason. But rest assured, your selection is correct, so accept your fate and feel proud. Your sacrifice will save our community from suffering. Thank you again for your sacrifice." So yes, friends, seeing this video, we viewers can clearly understand that this man was someone from Widow's Bay in older times, and back then sacrifices were made here. Why? So that the entity here would let the community thrive. This also means the entity on Widow's Bay requires sacrifices every so often. And this video was basically an induction video for the people chosen to be sacrificed. Remember the note Patricia found in the blanket? Whoever wrote that note must have been someone chosen for sacrifice back in the day. They used that very blanket, and knowing they wouldn't be around when it was found, they hid the note inside it. This also means this shelter is a dangerous place. Systems were built here to carry out sacrifices for the island's entity in older times. We'll get into more of this as the story goes on, but for now the story shifts over to Ruth and Tom. Ruth and Tom are actually having a really good time together. She's showing him old photos and all sorts of things. Ruth even gives Tom a tour of her home. At one point, Tom indirectly asks Ruth if she had the chance to save many lives, but had to take one life to do it, would she? Tom frames this as the classic trolley problem. A large trolley is speeding towards several people tied to the tracks, and they'll all perish on impact. But Ruth has the option to switch the track, redirecting the trolley to another path with just one person on it. Would Ruth switch? Ruth says she would not switch. Why? Because in Ruth's view, it is those people's fate to perish. And that's just how life is. You can't control life. Sometimes good things happen, sometimes terrible things happen, and you just have to accept it. But if Ruth switches the track, she'd be actively making a choice to end someone's life, and she could never do that. Hearing this, Tom gets frustrated all over again, because he came there specifically to end Ruth's life to save the whole island. In the middle of their chat, Tom's eyes land on a pendant, and it's the exact same pendant, friends, that we saw Francis wearing. Ruth also casually mentions that back in 1942, workers on the island had started building an actual trolley, and every single one of those workers just vanished. I mean, friends, who even knows how many incidents have happened on this island? Anyway, after their conversation, it's time for Ruth to take her medication, and Tom offers to go get it for her. Tom mixes both of Ruth's medications together and brings them over, meaning, friends, Tom is about to end Ruth's life. His mindset has not changed. On the other side, in the shelter, everyone is being handed meal packages and water, but some of the packages have mold in them. The crowd immediately loses it, and people start snatching food from those whose packages are fine. In short, full-on chaos breaks out, and Wyke and Patricia try their best to get it under control. Things settle down for a moment, but that elder just won't quit. He says, sure, we can go weeks without food, but how do we survive without water? And everyone starts going at it again. Patricia somehow manages to calm everyone down. Meanwhile, in another room of the shelter, Beecher is there, and Rosemary had set aside 2 water cans specifically for his wife. Rosemary tells Beecher that Wyke, Patricia, and Tom are always whispering amongst themselves, and that the 3 of them had her trace Richard Warren's entire bloodline for some reason. Hearing this, Beecher confronts Patricia directly and demands she tell him everything that's going on this island. So Patricia fills him in on the island's curse and also tells him that right now Tom has gone to end Ruth's life. Hearing this, Bashir immediately breaks out of the vehicle and sprints toward Ruth's house. Meanwhile, at Ruth's house, Ruth had taken her medication and looked like she might be gone. But when Tom gets close, he finds Ruth is just asleep. So the medication didn't do it, and now Tom has to think of something else. As for Evan, he and PJ and Kelly are exploring the underground area of the shelter when Kelly actually kisses Evan. After that, the 3 arrive at a room with an unsettling electric chair and a metal door. We had actually seen this room in an earlier episode. Kelly and PJ start joking around and sitting in the chair, but Evan is spooked. Parallel to this, chaos inside the shelter keeps growing as people mess with the light panels and everything. Lights go out, flicker, the situation is spiraling. Then the speakers crackle on with a voice saying, "The time has come. Listen to your facilitator, move forward, and do not beg." Guys, this was an old recording from back when Widow's Bay's residents used to offer sacrifices to the entity. Hearing this, everyone panics even more. And Gail, who'd been watching old tapes, finds one where the same old man says, "Stay brave and fulfill the pact. Our survival depends on it. These dark days will not end until we fully honor this vow. A life for a life, the island will make its own demands clear. The sound of each church bell requires one soul. You may feel the urge to comfort those who are to be offered, to console them. Do not do this. Their fear is necessary. Their dread is required. It has been said that entity savors the taste of that fear. Let us pray it sleeps a long and peaceful sleep." Seeing this recording, Gail is absolutely broken, and it was clear that in Widow's Bay's past, people were genuinely offering sacrifices to the entity. And if you remember, back in episode 2, the church bell rang even though it was chained up. That was a signal from the entity that it needed sacrifices. How many times did the bell ring in episode 2? We'll decode that in the theory section. For now, we also see visuals in the tape of hooded people with blindfolds chained being walked toward the entity. Patricia spots Gail and tells him to calm the crowd, but Gail screams that this place is a death trap. Everybody run. People start bolting and there's already no power. The shelter is in complete chaos. And if we take Widow's Bay's history seriously, something terrible is about to happen in there. Meanwhile, Tom is frustrated that Ruth just won't go. He tries to radio Patricia in the shelter on the walkie-talkie, but the signal won't come through. Tom picks up a pillow, planning to use it to quietly finish a sleeping Ruth. But then Ruth wakes right up and starts talking to him. She tells him that despite never marrying, she had an affair with a married man when she was in her 40s. Since the man wouldn't leave his wife, the relationship ended. And here Ruth drops a massive reveal. She had gotten pregnant by this man, secretly gave birth to a daughter, and then handed the baby to that man and his wife to raise. Ruth quietly watched her daughter grow up from a distance and says her daughter had a decent childhood, but her daughter didn't survive in the end. At this point, Tom is completely stunned and asks Ruth, "Who was your daughter?" Ruth says, "My daughter is the one who married you." Yep guys, Ruth's daughter was none other than Lauren, who was Tom's wife. And Lauren's son, Evan. Which means guys, Ruth is actually the last living descendant of Richard Warren, and the actual last living descendant is Evan, Tom's own son. Ruth tells Tom this is why she has a special place in her heart for him. Ruth even used to visit Lauren when she was in the mental asylum. Ruth has been working at the mayor's office all this time just so she can see her grandson Evan every single day. She even has Evan's photo on her fridge at home. Tom is absolutely coming undone hearing all this, and thankfully he hadn't finished Ruth off, because even if he had, the curse wouldn't have ended. Tom snaps at Ruth a little out of shock, scaring her. He asks who else she's told, and Ruth says Tom is the first. Tom calms down and pulls Ruth into a hug. Right then, Beecher walks through the door and immediately shoots Ruth. Yep guys, Beecher had come to end Ruth because he desperately did not want his about to be born child to enter this cursed world. He shot her and the bullet connected. Tom screams at Beecher that Ruth is not the last descendant, and Beecher points his gun at Tom, demanding to know who the real last descendant is. Tom starts saying he doesn't know. But guys, we know Tom is lying to protect Evan because Beecher would not spare him either. As for Evan, he's still in the underground bunker with Kelly and PJ, and then Kenneth, the custodian from the mayor's office, shows up. Kenneth scolds them and tries to run them off, and the three head out of the room. But before Kenneth could follow, PJ locks him inside the electric chair room from the outside and bolts. Kelly runs too, but Evan stays. He wants to get Kenneth out. Evan tries desperately to open the lock from outside, but for some reason it just won't budge. Then they hear Kenneth screaming from inside like some entity is dealing with him. Evan is terrified, but then Kenneth's voice goes silent. That means the entity had taken Kenneth, and the moment Kenneth went silent, Evan was able to open the door and step inside, but there was nobody there. The moment Kenneth vanishes, the storm outside just stops, which calms the people in the shelter down. Bashir also lowers his guard. He'd had Tom at gunpoint. Surprisingly, the shot Bashir fired had only grazed Ruth's ear and passed through, meaning Ruth didn't go either, and she comes back round. Tom immediately starts yelling to get Ruth to a hospital. Across Widow's Bay, everything suddenly settles, and Vike and Patricia think maybe Tom dealt with Ruth after all. But guys, Ruth is very much alive, and so is her descendant Evan. The storm stopped because the entity received Kenneth as a sacrifice. Scene cut. The next scene shows Widow's Bay with houses, signs, and everything wrecked from the storm. Tom stands near the water and tosses that yellow pendant into the ocean. Then Tom and Evan are about to drive away when the church bell rings again. This time it rings 8 times, meaning the entity wants 8 more souls, and that is where Widow's Bay Season 1 ends. So guys, that was the complete story of Widow's Bay Season 1, and the last episode had absolutely insane twists and turns. Now let's you and I dig into a ton of theories together. First, let's talk about the root cause. How exactly did this entire curse start back in 1702? So guys, when Richard Warren and his people first settled on this island, the first winter was so brutal that there was literally nothing to eat. People were so desperate they were consuming bodies, and Richard himself was about to do something terrible. But right at that moment, he spotted a dark mushroom, the same one Tom accidentally eats later, and the same one from that snowy wilderness scene at the start of episode 5. That was Richard. Richard thought God had saved him, but what came to him was not God. It was a demon, or the hungry soul of the island itself. Richard signed a pact with this entity using his own crimson fluid and bodily substances. In exchange, the entity let the islanders survive. But every deal has a price. The condition was, as long as Richard's bloodline remains alive, the deal holds and the curse persists. The only way to break the curse is to completely end Richard's lineage. That's what Tom realizes in episode 7, and that's what the entire finale hinges on. From this deal comes something people call the covenant, a sacred binding promise, a contract that cannot be broken. The people of Widow's Bay had figured out centuries ago that they couldn't beat this entity, so they found a different approach, keeping the entity fed and satisfied through planned sacrifices so it wouldn't lose it and destroy the whole town. And the most terrifying part of this entire system is the church bell. Remember, the bell is chained and literally cannot be rung, but it rings supernaturally, and when it does, it's a warning. However many times it rings, the entity needs that many souls. One ring means one soul, two rings means two, and so on. Reverend Bryce had learned this terrible truth, and maybe the weight of it was something he just couldn't carry, which is why he did what he did to himself. And this is where the most discussed theory comes in. If you look closely, the bell rang 8 times at the very start of episode 2. And if we count all the people who couldn't make it across the entire series, exactly 8 people are gone. First was sailor Shep Clark, who vanished into the fog in episode 1. Second was Reverend Bryce. Third was founder Richard Warren himself. Fourth was the Boogeyman. Then the 2 people the Boogeyman unalived while chasing Patricia. 7th was the drug dealer Shaman, swept away in the tornado. And 8th was Kenneth, who vanished in the underground room in the finale. So all 8 check out, which is why the storm stopped. The entity got all the souls it needed, settled down, and the storm ended. But here's where a twist comes in, guys, and a lot of people subscribe to the second theory too. If you listen very carefully, the bell in episode 2 didn't ring 8 times, it rang 9. Though the 9th gong sounds a bit like an echo, which is why some people get confused. So yes, we are not totally sure if it rang 8 or 9 times. But let's say the bell really did ring 9 times, and if we only count Kenneth's end as a proper accepted sacrifice, then the 8 rings in the finale mean the entity still needs 8 more souls. Out of the original 9, only 1 was truly delivered, Kenneth. This would mean everything else that happened across the series wasn't counted as proper sacrifices at all. Those were just the entity's frustration, its anger at not being fed the right way. And that's the whole point of the system. The best approach is giving the entity a calm, planned, chosen sacrifice. If you don't do that, the entity brings storms, fog, monsters, and makes life unbearable. That's why in the past, people turned on each other and at one point descended into cannibalism. Both theories hold up, guys, and honestly both land quite well. You can believe 8 sacrifices were fulfilled so the storm ended, but 8 more are now needed. Or you can believe the entity needed 9 and only 1 has actually been delivered so far. Speaking of sacrifices, the tapes Gale finds in the finale are basically an induction video, an orientation reel for people chosen for offering. In the video, this cheerful looking guy sits there and explains, "You have been selected for offering." This selection was not random. A committee of your peers carried out a very fair and rigorous selection process. There could be many reasons you were chosen. Maybe you committed a crime, maybe you owe something to society, or some other reason. But the video keeps reassuring. Stay calm, don't be scared. This is all for a good reason. Your sacrifice will save the whole community from suffering, so feel proud of your fate. Meaning, guys, this video was made to mentally prepare people for their own end, so they'd walk toward it quietly without making a scene. And all of this happened in a very organized way. The video shows hooded people with blindfolds, chained, being walked toward the entity. Remember the note Patricia found in a blanket? Whoever wrote it must have been someone sacrificed in a previous cycle. They used that blanket beforehand and slipped the note inside, so that when someone finally found it, the writer would already be gone. This also means the shelter is not just an emergency shelter. It was built around the entire sacrifice system of this island. Now let's hit a really important point. Richard Warren couldn't end for centuries because his deal with the entity was keeping him alive. The entity itself was sustaining him. The very same thing seems to be happening with Ruth. Ruth is 84 years old and yet she's extraordinarily healthy. She runs on a treadmill, climbs stairs like a young person. Tom tries to finish her with a medication mix-up. She doesn't go. Bashir shoots her. The bullet grazes her ear and passes through. After all those attempts, she's still here. This builds a wild theory, guys, that the moment Richard was finished, the entity latched its deal onto the oldest living descendant at that time, which was Ruth, meaning the entity is supernaturally protecting Ruth because she's now the anchor of the curse. And if Ruth were to go, the entity would latch directly onto Evan, the next last descendant. This is also why in the finale, when Evan was in that underground room, the entity took Kenneth but left Evan completely alone. The entity waited until Evan stepped out of the room, because finishing Evan would mean destroying its own bloodline anchor, breaking its own deal. And one more heartbreaking detail, guys, Evan can now never leave this island because he is the Warren bloodline. Now the biggest question everyone has, what exactly is this entity? And the interesting thing is the show never directly shows it. Not once in the entire season does it appear in its true form. We only ever see its effects, sometimes as fog, sometimes as a storm, sometimes as monsters like the sea hag or the boogeyman. Richard calls it a demon, but also says maybe this demon is the island's own soul, which points to a theory. The entity isn't some outside invader, it is Widow's Bay itself. The land, the ocean, the whole island is a living, hungry thing that needs souls to stay alive. Some people connect it to the island's Lord Protector power, since Richard was also called the Lord Protector. Another interesting theory is that it's an Onryo, a vengeful spirit abandoned on this island by its own people centuries ago, and now taking out that pain on the entire world. And there's a more science fiction flavored theory. The dark mushroom isn't just a drug, it actually changes the human mind and body, slows aging, and connects people to some vast hidden consciousness, a kind of neural network. That's why Richard survived for centuries and why anyone who eats the mushroom gains true sight. If true, the entity isn't a ghost or demon at all. It's a massive underground consciousness spread across the whole island, and the mushroom is just the method to log into that network. One thing that makes all these theories even more unsettling. When people were trapped in the church during a storm, it only took 4 days for them to start consuming each other. 4 days? That hints the entity was already messing with their minds, meaning this thing doesn't just end people. It drags out the worst in them and brings it to the surface. What the truth actually is, we'll probably find out in season 2. Now let's get into some hidden details that a lot of people noticed and which make it feel like the creators had everything planned from the very beginning. First detail is Wake's hand. In episode 7, when Wake tries to open Richard's cylindrical pendant, his left palm gets badly cut. This isn't random, guys. It's the exact same spot where Richard would cut his own hand to mix his crimson fluid into the dark mushroom to feed the entity, meaning the creators connected Wake to that ritual, like a very deliberate hint. The second big detail is the brooch. Back in 1702, Sarah gives the little brooch from her mother to young Francis. And in the present, when the undead Richard looks at his children's preserved belongings, the brooch is missing from the collection because Francis took it with her when she survived. And in the finale, this same brooch shows up with Ruth. Also, in the painting of Francis hanging in Rosemary's office, Francis is missing a finger because as a child, a wagon wheel ran over it in an accident. The camera keeps aligning Ruth with that painting, almost like it was hinting all along that Ruth is the bloodline's matriarch. And the Evan twist was actually subtly hinted at in episode 7 way before the finale. Another thing you might have noticed, whenever the 1702 past story plays out, the screen's aspect ratio shifts to 4:3, like an old school film, and the show's main poster has a mysterious figure standing in a doorway that fans have been building theories around. Now let's get into theories that have been going wild in fan communities online. The biggest one is about Wyke. Think about it, Wyke knows everything about this island. Every monster, every legend, every escape route, all of it flows from him. Stephen Root himself, who plays Wyke, has said that Wyke sees himself as the island's guardian and has spent his whole life learning the rules of this curse. Now fans are asking, isn't Wyke's knowledge just a little too specific? What if Wyke is actually part of or was once part of that secret committee that has been quietly choosing people for sacrifice for 300 years? His guilt over Mark, his alcoholism, his obsessive drive to protect this town, all of it feeds this theory. Who these committee members are and who's running things in the present day could be a massive plot point for season 2. The second popular theory is about the monsters. A lot of people believe the sea hag and the boogeyman were once real people who figured out out the island's true nature, and just like Tom and Bashir tried to end the Warren bloodline to break the curse. But when they themselves were finished or buried alive, they couldn't fully leave because now they too were cursed and couldn't escape the island even in death. So they stayed as revenants, sometimes warning the living, sometimes taking revenge on those who cursed them. Another interesting theory is that the island itself wants the bloodline to survive because as long as the bloodline lives, the deal holds. That's why people point out tourist girl Kelly is practically drawn to Evan, and Ruth's backstory suggests she always had admirers. What if the island is quietly pulling strings to make sure the Warren line keeps going? Some people even believe the entity isn't a demon but a vengeful spirit abandoned on this island by its own people. And there's a theory about the show's structure itself, that maybe each season will center around a single sacrifice cycle, and as seasons go on, the hauntings get more violent, constantly throwing Tom's group into the dilemma of whether to offer sacrifices one by one or all at once. Now here's a mind-blowing detail: the cannibalism in God's house article hanging in the museum. If you take the first letter of each paragraph, it spells out SOS damn US. Like the island itself is crying out, "Save us, we are cursed." Similarly, episode 4's evil book was titled Your Turn, Out with the Old and In with the You, and its author was Lucy Fours. Say it out loud, Lucy Fours sounds like Lucifer, a clear signal that the book was dark. And a fly keeps appearing on the cover of that book. In horror, flies are never random. They always symbolize demons, decay, and death. Patricia sitting on her bed writing furiously through the night is also a classic trope called manic writing. Just like Jack in The Shining, obsessively filling pages. The in episode is packed with details too. Remember when Tom goes into the crawl space and finds a skeleton? Look closely. That skeleton is wearing the exact same plaid shirt Tom has on in that moment, as if the creators are hinting that this could be Tom's fate too. Then when inn-owner Kurt steps into the captain's suite for just 30 seconds, when the door opens, the room looks like someone has been living there for days. That weird warping of time is a direct nod to the movie 1408. And the whole William in the bar scene is a clear homage to The Shining, where Jack meets Lloyd, the ghost bartender. One more small thing that's easy to miss: in the welcome video, there's a blurry figure standing in a doorway. That was placed there on purpose. It's what you'd call a monumental horror image, a visual that without a single word tells you something is deeply, deeply wrong. And even the names of the townspeople are horror references. Rosemary and Ruth come from Rosemary's Baby. Dale comes from Twin Peaks, Jerry sounds like Stephen King's Carrie, and Patricia might be inspired by Alfred Hitchcock's daughter, Patricia Hitchcock. Patricia's cocktail party episode is basically a mashup of The Wicker Man and Carrie. Her animal horn crown is a clear nod to the Wicker Man's animal masks, and the crowd walking in a trance toward the bonfire is that film's own version of the fire sacrifice scene. The entire 1702 flashback episode feels like Robert Eggers' The Witch, and Richard cutting his hand to draw out crimson fluid is a classic sign that a deal with something very dark is being made. Two more wild details from the finale worth calling out. The orientation tapes Gale finds have the entire vibe of Lost's Dharma Initiative induction videos, chillingly normal and bureaucratic. And that electric chair room, director Hiro Murai has confirmed it was inspired by A Clockwork Orange. The eye contraption hanging above the metal door is there specifically so that whoever walks through is forced to look at it. Murai also says that in the last 2 episodes he deliberately scaled back the horror tropes, because the real fear by then isn't the sea hag or the boogeyman. The real fear is seeing how far normal everyday people will go to protect the ones they love. And maybe that is the true message of this whole series. Now the most important question: what can we expect from season 2 and when is it coming? First, the good news. Apple TV has officially renewed Widow's Bay for season 2. In fact, this renewal was announced on June 11th, even before the finale had aired. And Apple also signed a multi-year deal with creator Katie Dippold. However, season 2 hasn't gone into production yet and the writer's room still needs to be assembled. Season 1 was shot in Massachusetts starting June 2025 and it took roughly 10 to 12 months to release after that. Going by that timeline, season 2 is likely coming in late 2027 or early 2028, so we do have a bit of a wait ahead. As for where the story goes, there are some pretty major hints already. Katie Dippold herself said something fascinating. Season 1 was basically a prequel in a way, a setup for what it actually means to live on a haunted island. The real ride is just starting now. The biggest threat is going to be Bashir. Think about it. This guy will go to any length to protect his unborn child. He shot Ruth without hesitation, and if he ever finds out the real last descendant is Evan, he won't spare him. And Tom now carries this horrifying secret that he has to protect at all costs. Director Hiro Murai has also confirmed that the dynamic has gotten wildly complicated because Tom and Bashir share a dark secret now, both having gone to Ruth's house to deal with her. And the painful thing is, Tom will probably hide this from Wyke and Patricia too, because those two think the storm stopped because of Ruth's fate. But Ruth is alive, and Wyke and Patricia are going to find that out. Tom's entire mindset is going to shift. His goal is no longer turning this place into a tourist spot. Now it's one thing only: protect his son Evan, no matter who he has to keep in the dark to do it. Beyond that, season 2 might also feature some standalone anthology-style episodes, just like season 1 had the Sea Hag and Boogeyman episodes. Murai has said the finale kind of reset the show, which lets them do more of those self-contained bottle episodes. And Dipple has even hinted that if people keep loving this world, she could see future standalone miniseries, like what happened inside the inn on that New Year's night could be its own complete 6-episode story. We'll also get more flashbacks, and the biggest question season 2 will wrestle with is whether the Bell's demands and the sacrifices are fixed and inevitable, or whether they can actually be changed. That's the complication season 2 is going to be built around. So guys, that was every major theory from Widow's Bay season 1 and everything we know about season 2. Which of these theories hit hardest for you, and what do you think is going to happen to Bashir in season 2? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, smash that like button and share it, and if you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe. We keep dropping videos like this. Peace.